Greetings, YouTube. I'm going to be talking about a gaming book today, and it's only appropriate that I be wearing my Beholder t-shirt. Now, some of you might remember, it's a long time in the past, back in 2009, I talked about the D&D setting X-Crawl, where the Roman Empire never fell, magic was real, and the most popular reality TV program are dungeon crawls. Well, the people over at Goodman Games have decided that they want to update this to Pathfinder. So they're going to have a Kickstarter. And for some inexplicable reason, someone saw my X-Crawl review and asked if I'd like to take a sneak preview of their layout copy and do an overview for them for the general population, see if anyone else would like to be involved in the Kickstarter. So anyone who's watched my channel for a while knows that I'm a big fan of Pathfinder. I consider it as the logical evolution of 3.5, and I consider it to be superior to 3.5. And I like the options it gives, I like the power curve, and I like the fact that there is so much third-party material out there, not to mention first-party material from Paizo, that there's just a plethora of things you can do with it. So what are they doing here with the Pathfinder version that's different? Well, they're updating all the rules, of course. So all the races and everything have been updated to the OGL Pathfinder, or was that PSRD? Yeah, Pathfinder Source Reference Document. So that's all being done. They've updated the timeline for the game. Kind of made it a bit more of a fusion of both Roman and the British traditions that were present in North America. So you have a Roman Empire with an emperor, Emperor Ronald I, but you have British titles for the nobility. So each precinct in the North American continent is controlled by an archduke, and below them are dukes and counts, barons, and of course lords and ladies. So it has a bit more of a European vibe in some way, which is probably going to be much more approachable to a lot of American gamers and European gamers. The legions are still called the Legion, and people that serve in it are still called legionnaires, so that makes perfect sense. Again, it's the Roman Empire. And you still have the political structure of the Roman Empire. So you have a vast body of commoners who are with essentially no rights. And then you have a small class of merchants and very minor nobles. And then you have the aristocracy themselves, who are in charge of everything. And of course, sitting at the top is the emperor. Of course, this being D&D, you have the gods, which are real. In this case, mostly the Olympic gods. They do also have some of the gods, like the gods of the elves, the dwarves, the racial gods, though each of the races is only really shown as having one. It would be nice to see some of these things fleshed out in the future. And the Native Americans are also present with a single god represented, but this is just the general setting book, so I'm hoping that this will get fleshed out also in the future. So I'm going to give you a quick overview using the table of contents, and the book has both a table of contents and an index, so that right there gets kudos from me. They do a brief discussion of the key elements of the X-Crawl world, and I'm going to give you a quote from this. X-Crawl is a blend of unexpected genre elements combined to create a highly original, offbeat adventure game that combines strategic dungeon crawls, action in a harsh, dystopic setting of absolute authoritarianism and rigid class conflict, with a quirky alternative modern history with a carnival mirror view of the strange world we live in, and a treatise on the phenomenon of fame and our celebrity-worshipping culture. It does indeed. It's a grand strategic challenge that forces out-of-the-box thinking by presenting crawlers with improbable situations that they simply cannot discover in a standard fantasy setting. Most of all, X-Crawl is fun, monster slaying, sports car winning, crowd pumping, face on the cereal box, fun. In short, it's not your grandma's dungeon crawl, and they are correct there. So then we have the creating X-Crawl characters, determining ability scores, choosing a race and class, pretty standard setting material. Then they talk about the dwarves, elves, gnomes, half-elves, half-orc, halflings, and humans. Again, they're pretty close to standard standard Pathfinder races. Then we have the actual classes that are specific to the X-Crawl setting. Now you can, of course, use the classes that your game master allows you to use from Pathfinder, but some of them I don't think are going to be as useful to the artificial environment that is the X-Crawl. For example, a barbarian's a barbarian, could be useful anywhere, but a ranger is all about nature. This is a completely artificial environment, so rangers and druids may not be very appropriate to an X-Crawl. These classes are specifically built to them. So first we have the athlete. The athlete is a hand-to-hand grappler. They are very much about getting in close, grabbing your opponent, and throwing them around. So you have that very much professional wrestling vibe going on there in that regard. Also, they are very good at perfecting their athletic prowess, and as they get higher level, they get better at achieving what is called the zone, of getting in that perfect spot, that absolute flawless moment where everything works in your favor, until of course it doesn't. Then we have the Blaster. Now the Blaster, an arcane caster, doesn't have access to 9th level spells and has some limitations. It can't make any magic items, doesn't get Scribe Scroll, doesn't have a familiar. But the Blaster can spontaneously convert a memorized spell slot to pure arcane power and blast it out. Think of this as a slightly more versatile warlock. That's the way I read it right off the bat. You have access to the same spell list, so you could use magic items that the character did not create, but you can use spells and things you find or have been provided to you from your team or something like that. But you are the artillery, for the group. And you can apply traits to your blast, your arcane blast, and some of these traits reduce your damage for versatility. As your damage dice goes up over time, you might be willing to say, okay, I'll sacrifice a couple of dice of damage if it means I can do X, Y, or Z. And some of these traits, for example, for like a wall of fire, you convert your blast into a wall for crowd control. You can turn your blast, which is a kind of a small fireball essentially, into a ray. If you want to go after that one spellcaster, it's a touch attack, but there's no saving throw against it because normally there is. And then there's, for example, there's a range one. Normally it's a 30-foot range, but you can get a trait that makes it 60 or 120. Doesn't cost you any dice, it just makes it further, which is very good. And if your opponents don't think you have that up your sleeve, very useful. So a really nice version of an arcane caster and very appropriate to the flashy, showy, artificial life that is in an X-Crawl. Then you have the Brawler, and the Brawler gets in there and they beat things with their fist. It's all about getting up close and personal. And between the Brawler and the Athlete, you really have that mixed martial art thing going on really well. They've got the bases completely covered on this. So they're a fighter, but they're a fighter that kind of makes me think of the Thug from 3.5, which was a variant fighter, an urban fighter, and the Brawler made me think of that. I have no idea if they're inspired by that or not, but I thought they're very well done. Then you have the Jammers, and the Jammers are a modern version of Bard. Think rock and roller, punk rock, rap, heavy metal. They're the modern version of a Bard who also has slightly more martial characteristics than the traditional Bard does. So they get good at using a specific type of weapon, which is also useful because, again, the artificial environment of the X-crawling dungeon crawls require everybody in the party to have some kind of martial characteristic. You really can't have a complete support character. It's just too dynamic. Next we have the Messengers, and the Messengers are literally the messengers of the gods. They have been spoken to by the Olympic gods, and their message is, go join X-Crawl. No one knows why, but you are the messenger of the gods. And as a conduit for their power, you are literally of their bloodline. So you made me think of Percy Jackson. I read this and I'm like, this is Percy Jackson right here, man. This is awesome. And again, it's a dynamic because you could have these people come from any background. They can be an accountant. They can be a firefighter. They can be anything prior to their being called up. And they have to live up to their god's desire as they are his or her representative in the games. Nobody knows why. Maybe you'll figure it out. And then you have the Specialist, which is the X-Crawl specific version of the Rogue. More of a generic version of the Rogue. It's a little less specifically second story man and more versatile at skills. Has the whole idea of the special traits that the abilities that they pick up over time, but a little more focused again for the artificial environment that is the X-Crawl. All right, then we have some new skills, and I apologize, I can't remember off the top of my head what they were, but they're skills which are appropriate to the X-Crawl environment of the grandstand. Yeah, sorry, that's one of them, grandstanding, things like that, of the showmanship that is present in this artificial, again, American gladiator type of a game. Then they how traditional skills from Pathfinder can be used in the X-Crawl. Then the section on equipment. Then they talk about religion, the Olympic deities, and non-Olympic deities, new system, mojo, fame, and more. Now, fame is an important part in this game because you have so much is dependent on your character's ability to be popular and to get sponsors and to get support. That's very important. So fame plays a part in this, and you get fame points which you can then use, and you can get feats that also improve your fame. You can use that within the game structure and outside the games. And Mojo is a pool of points that your group has, which the group can decide, okay, you, Bob, we're going to give you 2 Mojo points in the next round because we really need you to make this thing. So it's a pool of action points that the group can use to help the group survive together, which was a nice touch. Oh, and one thing, the Jammer, if they get to 20th level and they have at least 50 fame points, they can't die normally. They get killed, they go away for 2 to 6 months, and then they're reborn. They come back to the scene. So it's a rock and roll star, man, that just never fades away. Awesome concept. Pity Jim Morrison didn't have that. Then we have the section on game mastering X-Crawl, where X-Crawl differs from standard fantasy campaigns, tips for good X-Crawl games, easy steps to X-Crawl game mastery. And then they talk about a section that deals with the North American Empire itself. Then they talk about American Commoner, the American Aristocrat, Professional, Pro Monster, which is an NPC class for monsters to get better, to become more of a challenge. That way a low-level monster can continue to be a challenge for the party, even though they are higher level. And maybe it's the same monster. What if you've got a monster that is gaining levels and becomes a nemesis for the group? That would be very cool. And then, of course, you have Soldier, Legionnaire. Then we have the section on the games themselves, a brief history of the X-Crawl, modern X-Crawl, designing your own dungeon crawls, the imperial rules of X-Crawl, because there's a point and scoring system within the game itself that lets your group, your X-Crawl team, knows how it stands in reference to other teams, and of course decides which sponsors are going to want to go after you and what type of sponsors. Then we have backstage at the crawl, and then the section on rewards. And this can be fame rewards, experience points rewards, gold prizes and magic items, and random fame rewards. And then there is an appendix, which was inspirational reading for jamming, gaming, and watching, and then the index, and of course the OGL. So one of the signs of a game that I think is important is that if it gets me thinking of ideas, and as I was reading this, it got me thinking of ideas. For example, this whole continent is city-states, and between the city-states are vast swaths of wilderness and Native American areas and some of the native elves that still exist, and maybe some of the native halflings that still exist. And the Empire is saying the reason this is going on is because the dragons make it too difficult to have a pervasive continent-to-continent style culture. You have to be behind these walls. What if they're lying? What if these walls exist because the Empire is on a defensive? Why are they lying? Why are they on defensive? What's going on? But say they're not lying. So there really is going on out there. Are the NPCs, are the player characters working for a dragon? and the Empire doesn't know it? Were they hired by someone that's intermediary between themselves and a dragon? Are they being toyed with? Are they a pawn of the dragons and they don't know? Do the player characters have a desire to see the Empire win, or do the player characters have a desire to see the Empire maybe not win? Maybe they've got ethnic connections to the elves and the halflings, and maybe they want to see the Empire fall. What if you wanted to do a campaign that is just X-crawling? It's the perfect pickup game. Your group shows up at your house, you go, here's your characters, let's go. You know, it's a perfect beer and pretzel game because there is no justification for it. You don't need a justification. It's simply an episode of X-crawl. The cameras go on, and your characters go out there and go after beat the monsters, solve the problems, and get to the end of the dungeon where they can win the day. There needs to be no other background. But you could still do a campaign going from the lowest ranking, which is rank 5, all the way up to unlimited. And rank 5 starts in high school with boffer weapons, and you could play your characters again just from game to game to game to game. Or then you could do a full-fledged campaign, not only going through the X-crawls themselves, but the time between the games. Because look at boxers. Boxers are not box every single day, or every week, or every month. And the more professional, higher you get in your boxing career, the less often you box. All right, because the games, those boxing bouts become more dangerous. And just like in the X-crawl, they would become more dangerous. So what are they doing between the games? Are there political machinations? Are they going out to are they mercenaries? Are they adventurers outside the games? And do any of their X-crawl skills have any application at all to actually dungeon crawling? Probably not. So it could be interesting. And if you get better at doing things on the outside of the world, does that mean you're maybe holding back your ability to be good at the X-crawl? So it's a balancing act. You could turn this completely on your head, and you could play monsters. I mean, there's lots of player character classes out there, and inspirations for races from Pathfinder material. What if your characters were captured by the Empire, and you're now stuck fighting for your freedom to get out of the games? Or what if you were captured, and you're actually there on a mission? Your group is infiltrating the Empire from the inside of the games. Maybe you're there to assassinate a high-ranking noble. Maybe you're there just to foment revolution amongst the monsters in the games. There is so much you could do with this setting. And the fact that it's being updated to a currently supported version of D&D, and that's what Pathfinder is, folks, a version of D&D, is just awesome. So I'm very much in support of this idea. I think it's very well executed. I'm looking forward to seeing it full-blown. Oh, and one thing, when I got this, it was offered to me, and I downloaded it. And I looked at it, I only had a few minutes for that particular day, and I looked at it, and the thing that hit me right off the bat, was that the artwork nailed first edition Shadowrun. Just the look of it made me think first edition Shadowrun. And there's an ad in here within the game, or a picture within the game, which is kind of like a person holding up a magic item, and the activation phrase for the magic item is something like, "Eat it, McDonald's!" And that turns the magic item on. It's the perfect product placement. Absolutely perfect product placement. And it's the kind of thing that really summed up in my head what this setting is all about. The artificiality of reality television. Except you're playing D&D while you're doing it. So, if you have any interest in this setting, go out and support this Kickstarter. You're not going to be disappointed. This is going to be a solid product, and I'm really hoping that they can get this thing launched and funded, and the world can see this.